Hello and welcome to the DaTechGuy off the radio live stream spontaneous podcast. The spontaneous podcast is now going to be the standard way I do things from this point on because I don't know when I'm going to have time to do a podcast. I don't know whether I'm going to be in the mood to do a podcast. And frankly, I don't like a scheduled podcast. For one thing, it doesn't bring in an actual amount of revenue. There's not a fixed amount of revenue return for it, which is the reason why I do them. And secondly, if it's a required podcast, if I have to do it at a particular time, it becomes a chore rather than, I just want to say a few things. So instead, we have the DaTechGuy live stream podcast, and of course, if I do it spontaneously, if I get very few people, who cares? I did it spontaneously. If I have it regularly and I'm not drawing, it doesn't hurt the ego as much. So the very first thing I want to bring up for those of you who have an interest, I'm much better. Have a tiny bit of congestion, not enough even worth talking about. My quarantine is over. Technically, my leave from work is also over because this would be my normal day off. So I will be returning to work on Sunday, barring a sudden return to symptoms. All my sick time and most of my vacation time for the year has been burnt off to pay for it. But at least I still have a few days left if Pintastic comes back and so forth. But I am here. I am doing all right. And hopefully you'll enjoy what you see. And if you do like what you see, feel free to hit the tip jar because I'm very sure that I'll get banned sooner or later, or I don't have enough subscribers to be monetized by YouTube yet. I'm sure that they'll demonetize me when they if they decide to get around to it. But since I don't have the 1,000 subscribers, it doesn't really matter. So let's jump right in to the GameStop Robinhood story. Now, let me explain something. A very, very long time ago, when I was a kid, I read about stocks and how stocks work. Now, we were taught that this is how a stock worked when I was a kid. A person has a business or makes a product and decides it wants to be funded publicly. So they put out what's called a stock issue, public stock issue. And people decide, I think I can make money on this and buy those stocks. The company is funded by that stock issue. The original people who started the company make money because they have stock options for themselves. So they make a profit. They could sell out immediately or stay on board. And the stock goes up and down based upon how the company does. If the company is making a profit and shows prospect of making a profit in the future because either their product or service is done well or done better than other people or an innovation, then yeah, it's going to go up. If it doesn't, then it goes down, either because of poor management or an obsolete product or competition that's better than theirs. And the stock, and some stocks still do this, others don't, would pay a dividend, like a bank account. You put money in a bank, you get a small amount of interest back. You put money in a stock, the stock makes a profit. If the company makes a profit, they may pay a dividend to stockholders. Not all stocks. That's how we were originally taught back in the days when we were taught that things like cause and effect. However, since the very first day there was such a thing as stock markets, there's been stock manipulation. And it's very funny because what's been happening with Robinhood, what's been happening with GameStop is I'm watching this story about the stocks being shorted. And I happen to remember while I was on quarantine, I have been in quarantine since the 9th of January. I will be back to work on the 31st. So I had 20 days to play with. So I rewatched the entire series of Maverick, the old TV series from 57 to 62. And one of the episodes in the final season was called The Golden Fleecing. And it was about stock manipulation. Basically, these Quakers had found gold in their hills, and they trusted Maverick for reasons that you'd have to see. Maverick is in love with this girl whose father is a stock manipulator, and who says, "Oh, get into the business, get into the business." The father hears about the gold and conspires to steal it from them by getting them to put out a public issue, short selling the stock, making the stock crash, and then once it crashes, buying it up and then extracting the gold. The idea was to set up the company, fail to extract the gold, make it expensive, manipulate the stock so it drops, buy it up short. Company is now theirs. And the good guys end up winning. First, he tries to get enough money to get the stock saved. This is supposed to be in San Francisco around the 1880s or so. So the stock's only being traded in San Francisco on the San Francisco boards. It's a local stock. Remember, this is the days before telephones, before where the fastest communication was a person doing dots and dashes off of a telegraph. And what ends up happening is he has a friend that he recommended the stock to. Turns out the friend ran a tong, did not realize he ran the tong. Maverick is captured by the tong, who are going to torture him because of all the money they've lost. He tells them what's actually happened. Then the tong decides to back him. And with the tong saying anyone who sells this stock is going to be in trouble, suddenly the guy cannot. The tong buys up some stock, or one's other people. You supply this guy with the stock that he shorted, because remember, he has to buy back the stock to pay off his shorting. Can't do it, so he ends up forcing the thing from the $2 or $3 up to 20, 25. The guy pays him off and laughs it off, I've been beaten at my own game, but I'm still rich, so what do I care? Now, basically, what's happened with GameStop is this. I'm going to try and explain. I'm going to do my 30-second explanation. Then I'm going to read you an article or two, which explains it better. But the 50-cent explanation of what's been happening is very simple. GameStop is a brick and mortar company. And it's a brick and mortar company that sells game consoles, which is not a bad thing to have in terms of with people locked up in their house. The idea that you can go down the street and get a game console rather than wait for one to be shipped is not necessarily a bad thing, particularly when you figure that people aren't, if you've got people who are stealing off of your stoop, and they're not going to be punished, because after all, you can't punish people for committing crimes these days, especially ones that don't affect Congress. Having a brick and mortar place to buy a game system, knowing it's not going to be stolen off your porch, is something of some value. Also, let me point out something. This is a VHS tape. This is the John Wayne movie, The Comancheros, from 1961. John Wayne is not in favor these days because, conservative and self-reliant and traditional American. This is the second season of the TV series F Troop. This is on DVD. Now, F Troop is not favored anymore because this is, of course, an enlightened age. We can't laugh at cowboys and Indians. And this is a DOS copy of the spectacular game, came out in 1988, called Colonization. Now, the topic itself is fairly evil because you're colonizing and so forth. Sid Meier's, it came out around the same time as his first Civilization game. Spectacular game, but I happen to have an original disc. And the thing about having those three hard copy things is I don't have to buy it on the stream if I still have a VCR, and I do. I don't have to buy F Troop on the stream if I want to watch it, if I have a DVD player, which I do. And because of the program DOSBox, I can play this game without buying it from Steam again or anywhere else. And because I have these physical copies, if the elites want to edit them or change them, can't be done. So there's a reason why having being able to buy a physical copy of a V8 of a movie or a TV series or a game is worthwhile. So there are reasons why GameStop is worthwhile. Now, is it going to be a huge market anymore? No, but it's still going to be part of a market, and thus it can be profitable, especially at a time when everyone's at home playing video games. Well, basically a hedge fund decided to bet on its failure. And if you're buying short, if you're borrowing stock to buy short, you're saying, okay, I'm going to buy this at a particular price. I'm borrowing this and I'm going to have so many shares for you. Price has to drop. So you start, this is going to fall, this is going to fall, this is going to fall. And then when it falls below that point, you provide what you promised, and your profit is the difference between what it's worth at the time you have to pay your margin and what you promised. But if it ends up, well, then you've taken a loss because you still have to provide that stock. But that's never a problem because there's plenty of TV, plenty of radio, plenty of shows where you can manipulate this stuff. And what basically happened is people who were home in their houses with nothing better to do decided, we're going to play this game too. And GameStop, last time I looked, was trading. It had crashed a bit last night, but it's trading back in the 300s. Now, GameStop, in my opinion, is not worth $300 a share. It has an intrinsic value as a store, and it'll survive. And it's probably worth $10, $15, $20 a share, in my opinion. But it doesn't matter what I think it's worth, because the reality is something is worth exactly what someone was willing to pay for it. That's the reality. So now the hedge fund guys have to come up with the stock. And if no one's willing to sell, or not enough people are willing to sell, nothing happens. Now, that's my 30-cent explanation for it. Now I want to read you 2 pieces on the subject. Now, there's some salty language here that I am going to try and mitigate a little bit. But if you want to understand what's happening, I don't think you can do better than these 2 pieces. Now, these pieces are not from places like Rush Limbaugh or Stacey McCain, which is what I would normally use. This is from a board called Patriots Win. I'm going to tweet out I'm putting out the thing into chat so you can see what's going on. And I'm going to very briefly put this link in both Gab and in Twitter. So I'm going to put down my microphone because remember, this is a No Frills podcast. Reading this piece on the podcast concerning Robinhood. GameStop. Okay. And I should probably put another link to the podcast. Oh, I forgot to publish that. So I will publish it. And I'll copy the link and drop that into the Gab thing. I will copy that. Bang. Put it into Twitter. Put the word now first. Bang that. Okay, so this is the first piece that I'm reading here. It's titled, On GameStop, Why Hedge Funds Are Not Good Guys, While Redditards Are an Ally in This Particular Fight, and How the Mainstream Media is Lying to Us. Again, this is put out by someone called Trash Account 121. And this is about, I think it was a day old when I saw it, so now it's a 2-day-old thing. So let us begin by saying this. I am in on the GME squeeze. Yes, I have been since early December. Now, again, this is the person writing. This is not me. I have not bought any GameStop shares. I have no intention of buying any GameStop shares. This is not my fight. This is not my baby. This is not my bathwater. But again, this is the writer. I have made 5 figures so far on an initial buy-in of under $10,000. It will soon be 6 figures, and we'll see. I am legally required to mention that I am not a financial advisor, and nothing I say here should be construed as advice nor direction. This is simply data for you to understand what's going on technically for the stock market action and the larger implications. So we'll begin by a definition of short selling. Now, I've already given one, but I want you to hear his definition. Short selling, shorting, is the borrowing of shares from a broker with the promise that you will pay back in kind with as many shares as you borrowed. And if you don't pay back in a certain time frame, you begin paying interest on it. Shares are lent from brokers. To use a very simple example, Robinhood, yes, the app. Only big money hedge funds and financial institutions are allowed to short. It's financial shit. Anywho, if you're quick on the draw, you'll understand the implications. Shorting is when you believe a stock is going down. In other words, this is what in real life we would call gambling if you're going to a casino. This is, again, I'm interjecting right here. When you believe a stock is going down, if you borrow a share from a broker that's trading for $10 and short sell it, you pocket the $10 then and there. You then stand to gain as much as you buy it back for after the price goes down. If, for example, you buy the share back when the price has dropped to $5, you turn that share back to your lender and you've netted $5. So you've basically, on your $0 investment, because remember, you borrowed these shares, you've made $5. So with no money, you have made $5 minus whatever federal taxes you owe. Now, if you're doing this with 100,000 shares, you've made $500,000 minus the capital gains taxes and so forth. And those gains can be mitigated by losses that you had elsewhere. The maximum gain for this example is $10, i.e., the company bankrupts and the shares are worthless. I say believe with an asterisk because there's a caveat, and we'll come back to that. That's another point. If you short a stock to the point where you think the company is going to fail, then you can get all the stock you want. There's another great episode of Maverick that deals with that called Shady Deal at Sunny Acres, which it is said that the movie The Sting, the first half of that movie, is based on this. And it's a great episode. First, you should watch the Maverick series anyways, because it's a great series. But second, you want to watch Shady Deal at Sunny Acres because it's hilarious, especially if you've watched the series, because it was one of the first television episodes of television where all the key characters that had been introduced previously were all brought in together. It was something to see. Back to the article. Anyways, if you're quick on the draw, you'll understand the implications. Shorting is for when you believe a stock is going down. You borrow a share that's $10. The maximum gain for this is $10 because of the company bankruptcy, as I said. On the flip side, shorting has what it's called an infinite downside. That's because if you hold to the bitter end, which most shorts won't, the price of the stock could theoretically go infinitely high. So if you short a stock at $10 and it climbs to $15, by the time your margin called and asked to return the share, you must buy back the stock at $15 market value, or else pay an interest value based on the current stock value to the lender. So even if you're not paying back the $5, if you can either buy one for $15, say, okay, I'm going to eat my $5 loss. So if you have 500,000 shares, okay, I'm going to eat my $500,000 loss. Or you pay an interest rate and figure, I'm going to wait because this stock might still go down. I'm going to gamble. I'm going to keep gambling. I'm going to let it ride. Think of it as a roulette table. I'm going to let it ride. Stay with me. We're now going, as he puts it, balls deep into the market shit here. I promise to keep it simple. Again, this is the writer speaking. So shorters, such as the oft-mentioned Melvin Capital, tend to have huge pools of liquidity. They can afford to take an interest hit if they think they can hold on long enough for the trend of the stock past their initial short position. So let's say, like I said, it went up to 15. Well, now you either take the loss or pay an interest rate, which is a smaller loss, but still a loss, figuring, well, it'll still go back down. And the amount I'm going to pay, even if I buy the stock for 11, that extra dollar, instead of losing $500,000, I lost 100,000 plus the interest. So I'm still better off than I was. So I'm waiting. If they can, as I said, if they think they can hold through the upward trend past the initial short position till the point where it goes back under, they can buy back or cover their share at a profit, or at least a break even, or as I illustrated myself, at a point where the loss is minimal. Because when if you're a person who plays the stock market, you've got to be aware that sometimes you're going to lose. It's if you're playing it under. Remember, we're not talking about the rules I stated at the very beginning of the podcast, where you base your buying and selling on what you think the actual value of a stock is without trying to manipulate it, what the value of a company is. We're talking about playing it like you're gambling. Here's where the caveat comes in that I mentioned in point 1 of this thread. The trick is, all these hedge fund cats have a huge effing network of contacts in the mainstream media and politics, and will utilize them either when they first short or when they're in trouble to run hit pieces on the company they shorted, explaining why the price is way too high. They may or may not illegally also do shit like a massive sell-off or get someone else with large pools of money to burn, known as whales, to do so. This normally scares off normal investors who will see the downward trend and sell at whatever they can to mitigate their losses. Because a normal person, if you've got a few $1,000s in the stock market and you really don't want to lose that few thousand, you might decide, okay, I'll lose a little bit and sell off. They make their profit off of you. So shorts basically are pocketing the losses from Joe Blow and the novice trader, and, well, in my opinion, creating nothing of value. The money literally comes from scaring people and creating pessimism. F that. Moving on. And I want to point out something here, that thing about Joe Blow and the novice trailer, since I brought up the TV show Maverick. There's a very old rule in poker. And that rule is this. If you're sitting at the table and you can't pick out who the sucker at the table is after the first few hands, you're the sucker. You're the person who's going to be beaten. So unless you're just doing it, playing for poker for fun, if you're going to the casino, let's say if you go to the casino, you figure I'm going to blow $100 at the casino. That's fine. But if you're not talking the mortgage of your house, that's different. So back to the article. In particular regards to GameStop, we need to set the scene for what's going on with the company. Like most brick and mortar places, the Kung flu hit them very hard. And I'm sure Joe Biden is so upset that I used the word Kung flu and the Wuhan virus and the China virus. But I'm still a free American, born, and I'm used to being a free American, having been born in a free America. So I'm going to say things the way I want to say them. And if YouTube chooses to ban me for it later, or if someone watching decides that they're going to report me for daring to use the words China virus, Wuhan flu, or quote the article and say the Wu flu or whatever, that's life. I don't care. I have a life beyond doing this. Again, back to this. Like most brick and mortar places, the Kung flu hit them hard, and they took a tumble down to single-digit stock values. Shorts saw this, and knowing that GameStop which is GME on the stock market, is just another strip mall realtor, figured their time was coming, and they're going to be bankrupting for too long. So they shorted it, 20 as it was going down during the beginning of the coup. I don't know what he means by coup. Maybe he means Corona. Now, let's point out something here before I say another word. As I pointed out, they sell physical copies of games. They think they sell DVDs and VCRs, but just as an example, there are some advantages to physical values. There's some advantages to having, as I said, there's some advantage to being a place where if I want a game, I don't have to wait for it to come by mail. I don't have to, I can trade in old games that I have for a new one, or I can buy a game console and have it immediately and not worry about someone stealing it off my porch. There are advantages to a physical presence of a game or a game system or headphones or whatever. You can physically see them, physically touch them. So while GameStop, as I said earlier, its intrinsic value in the age of downloads is lower, it does still have some value for the niche of people who want to have something now. physically holding it in its hand. Okay, back to the article. But then they got greedy. I won't go into the technicals here because it would require an entire effing new thread to explain. But they did something called naked shorting. Now, this is not something I touched on earlier, so this is an important explanation. To short more shares than actually exist. They leverage shares held in call options. Again, not going to explain it. Look elsewhere. Basically promising to lenders, hey, I know you don't actually have this stock, and if the option holder exercises, they'll need 100 shares, but hey, I'm good for it. So they got more shares, these being implied, and shorted those shares, say at 15. Then GME still kept dropping. Cool. They'll make every cent they can, short some more, etc., etc. And I got to refer you, and I did this on Twitter earlier. I've talked a lot about over the years and written a lot about a TV show called Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, which came out in 85 and 88 or so. This character was a minister in the British government and then becomes prime minister in a special, and the series becomes Yes Prime Minister. And the series holds up spectacularly because the way the political elites work and the way the civil service works and the way the deep state works has not changed. There's a great episode called The Conflict of Interest about a banking scandal in the city being London, and this could apply to New York and stock margins, where the guy's saying, well, in the city, we loaned some money to, we're getting this money for 11, we got to loan it out for 14, and they seemed like decent chaps, and, it wasn't really our money to pay for, so we're going to lose a lot, so the government needs to bail us out. But why did you risk it? Well, it's not like it's our money. Again, you're playing with other people's money and you're rich and so forth. So watch the episode. It'll cost you $2. The 3 episodes you need to watch, like I said, the 2 episodes of Maverick, Shady Deal at Sunny Acres, The Golden Fleecing, and this Yes Minister episode will cost you a grand total of $6. And if you're playing games in the GameStop business and all this other stuff, Nokia and all the others that they're playing with right now, you can afford $6. And if you can't, you shouldn't be playing it on those things. So that's where. So we've just explained to you what this extra leverage is. So they're not only borrowing stocks, they're borrowing stocks that the other people don't have, and they're letting them. So that's all fine and good. So they literally shorted more. Back to the article, more stocks than GameStop even had available for trade. But if GME went bankrupt, as they earnestly believed, it wouldn't matter because they wouldn't have to pay back shares of companies that no longer exist. Now, again, as I pointed out, there is a market for GameStop. There's no reason for it to go bankrupt. But these very rich people decided they could become very richer if this happened. Enter player one, Michael Burry of Big Short fame. Burry saw what was going on, and he's been on the winning side of short positions before. Now, there's something to be said for shorts against scum like Enron. Short sellers do provide a value in driving down the value of companies that don't deserve their money. Now, I'm not going to judge whether a company deserves its money or not if I don't know the company. So I'm not going to judge one way or the other. This person believes that there is some value to short selling. I'm not going to argue one way or the other. I won't argue that. Problem is, looking at GME's finances, they were not on the track to bankruptcy. They were hurting, sure. Everyone was hit by the wolf flu was, but they were far from filing Chapter 11. So Burry, remember I talked about fundamentals. There is a fundamental market for a GameStop. So Burry bought shares or call options, can't remember which, a sizable amount that kept the stock from hitting the ground. Now, again, this is at this point, normal human beings are not involved here. This is another stock guy saying, these guys are full of it. This stock has value, so I'm going to buy some. I'm not going to let it crash. So he kept the stock from hitting the ground. Now, This already effed with the shorts because remember, they were now all in on GME bankrupting. They would never admit as such since naked shorting is illegal and all, but yeah, they were. But by chugging along, even if barely on a lifeline, GME's survival was troublesome to say the least. Enter player 2, Ryan Cohen, which I'm sorry, it sounds like a name I would use in a comedy, or that the Monty Python guys would use in a comedy. Of Chewy fame. You may or may not have heard of Chewy. Depends on if you have a pet or not. But the short version is they're an online pet supply company that Cohen ran really effing well, selling them to PetSmart for $2.5 billion. I think it was. Well, anyways, he makes companies work on an e-commerce platform, and he joins GameStop. Mind you, is of course traditionally a brick and mortar physical retailer. But consider the sentiment caused by an e-commerce guru deciding to roll the dice on GME. Was he going to fix them? Completely dominate the online video game retail market? Maybe. Maybe not. That's not super relevant. The main important point is the possibility that he could make GME look good again. So maybe he merges their physical mortar, brick and mortar, with a better system for selling online too. Maybe he figures out a way, because one of the reasons why GameStop can make an easy profit is they can take games in trade, and suddenly they have 5 games to trade for giving out one. So now you're basically restocking without laying out more cash than what you paid for an initial game. I don't know how you could do that on a virtual system, but maybe you can. Maybe you can erase game. Yeah, your game. We will let you download this game if these games are erased, and you pay a penalty if we detect them on your system or something. I mean, there's probably a way. I mean, my major is computer science. There's ways you could do that. So maybe this guy's going to figure out a brilliant way to make their system work online. Perhaps doing all of the accessories at the retail level for people to pick up in person while having the games downloaded. Who knows? Whatever. But this guy's now involved, and this guy has a reputation for successful online businesses. So what happens? Okay, we're back to this article. The stock price starts going up. For the shorts. We're now taking it in the shorts. Enter Play 3, Quarter 3 2020 earnings, and a new console cycle. Now, this applies to something I previously said. Okay, so what just happened in the video game world? Now, again, I'm not a big video game guy. My sons are. I'm not. PS5 and whatever, the new Xbox Series, Xbox Mod 5 or whatever it is came out. Hey, hate them all you want, but GameStop provides those consoles that millennials and Zoomers want. That alone would keep them solvent for a year or so because you buy the physical consoles. And like I said, if you're worried about porch pirates or you don't want to pay a premium for a faster delivery, or you want to have it now, you can go to a GameStop and buy the thing. That alone would keep GME solvent for at least a year or so. But then the Q3, and by the way, one other thing about having a physical copy of a game, if it's a game that does not require being online to play, if your internet drops, you're still playing. Important point. I forgot to bring that up. That alone would keep GME solvent for at least a year or so. But the Q3 report came out, and yeah, they took a hit from the Shanghai shivers, but they actually didn't do nearly as bad as other competitors. Actually, they did fairly decently. They're closing a bunch of redundant extra locations, and they have decent cash on hand, keeping them in the greenish. Plus, remember, you don't have to pay a GameStop guy much more than minimum wage because their job is basically to sell games, and if there's nobody around to play them all day. Worse and worse for the shorts. Some now have left their single-digit stock price short positions. The juice just isn't worth the squeeze. So some people have taken their losses and gotten out at this point, but not the biggest fish in the hedge fudge. They shorted at 10 or 20 at the stock price. And GME was still right there at that point in time last November. They can weather the storm. At least they'll break even, they figure. No losses in their portfolios. Enter player 4. Wall Street Bets, Biz, Stock Twits, and the various other retail individual traders on social medias. Okay, so now GameStop, which is GME on trading, is on the uptick. I mean, Cohen's good, but he's no miracle worker, right? GME will go down, except some retards on various financial forums, WSB being the largest source, even as early as a effing year ago, saw the ridiculously high short ratio and saw the writing on the wall. I understand there's apparently a whole sentiment about nostalgia that may or may not be the point. In other words, before the internet, a lot of these guys who are younger than me, I'm 57. So remember, when I was a kid, there was the Atari system first came out. The first home game console came out when I was 12. That gives you the idea of where I am on this. So these are people who are younger than me. Remember going to GameStop and having so much fun checking out new games and so forth. And when you get to be older, that means something to you. That means something to you a lot. Like, I'll go to friendlies now and again. There used to be like 7 or 8 friendlies near where I live. There's now 1 left. But I used to go there with my brother. They used to have all-you-can-eat fish, and I would go there with him, and we would have flounder. All-you-can-eat flounder. I never saw a place that had all-you-can-eat flounder before. And I remember going there with my brother when I was like 13, and he would take me, and it was special. So that sentiment means something. Again, back to the article. So GME is on the uptick. I mean, Cohen's good, but no miracle worker, blah, 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 blah. He saw the ridiculously high short ratio and saw the writing on the wall. I understand there's also a whole sentiment about nostalgia, but that may or may not be the point. Well, anyways, WSB is already known for being a bunch of DF millennials who vet 6 figures into random stocks and options as a joke. Now, think about how much money you must have to be able to put $100,000 into a stock as a joke. Now, if I had $100,000, I have 2 mortgages. I have a mortgage on the house I'm in now and a mortgage on a house that I rent. $100,000 would pay off either mortgage with money to spare for me, which means that now would have a house paid off that I could use to help support myself in my old age when I retire, or I can give it to my sons. My dream has always been, and you're going to laugh at this, my dream has always been, when I die, to give a house free and clear to each of my sons, so that no matter what happens, my sons will have a house free and clear. That may sound like an odd ambition to some of you, because I still want my sons to work hard. I want them to have responsibility. They both have good jobs. They both make good money. But I want them to have that. Just like my father helped out his sons and his daughters, I want to be able to help. I want them to have that, so that if everything goes wrong, they still have a house. That's important to me. So I keep working. I'm going to pay these houses off. Someday they will be my sons. And if they decide to dump them or whatever, or keep them for their children, that's on them or whatever. That's my dream. And these guys have enough money. They're much wealthier than me. They didn't run into the problems I've had. I failed at business a couple of times myself, which is my own fault. They have 6 figures to throw into stocks as a joke. And I want to mention something else that's not in the article as well. I have a friend who used to write for my site. He used to write as the science guy. I met him on a plane once while I was going to CPAC to cover it the very first time. Nice guy. He actually made good money off of laundry businesses. He was a physicist. He thought about running for Congress, but then got sick. Moved to Texas. Actually was a neighbor of George W. Bush for a while. From what I understand, Bush is a very nice neighbor. And so forth. And he said, and he runs with all of these very, very rich men. And he says the thing about very, very rich men is that they have more money than God and don't know what to do with it, in the sense that In the end, you can only sleep in one bed a night. It's like the old thing from Lone Wolf and Cub. You can only sleep in one bed at night. You can only eat one meal at a time. If you have enough money to go and buy everything you want, then you don't really does not like the desire for it. Like, for example, I have $12 credit on Amazon, and there's a movie or two I would like. I could just buy them. I don't. I'm going to wait for the movies to drop because I can't bear to pay $12 for a movie that I know will eventually be $5. Can't do it. Depression era parents can't do it. So if I just have them all, it's no fun. So with my little $12 credit, I'm playing that same type of game. Only these people do it with 6 and 7 figures because they have more than they will ever need. And that's why some people like that get bored. And that's why I'm kind of grateful that I'm where I am because, I've got my wife 33, it'll be 33 years this year. I've got good sons. I'm not rich, but I've got all the important things in life. And I got God. I got those things. I've got Christ. What else do I need in life? But anyways, back over here. They've got to the article, they've got a lot of money to burn. But this time, there was no meme. Buying up the shares means the shorts have to buy from them. Now, remember that example I told you from Maverick, where the tong is keeping people from selling. These people have to buy those shares. And that's the phone. And I'm not going to answer it because my wife is downstairs and can answer it. Plus, I don't know where the phone. Well, no, I can't handle a phone ringing. So I'm going to see who it is. I got to see where it is. Let's see who is it. I have no idea. NVIDIA Corporation. I have no idea who those are. So that can wait. So I'm going to leave that going there. So anyways. So they have a lot of money to burn. But this time there was no meme. Buying up the shares means the shorts have to buy from them. Because remember, the refresher. The shorts must buy the shares to return. They cannot pay back in kind or whatever the F. And the only people holding the shares are a bunch of memeing F-tods. Limited supply, extremely high demand. In other words, you have to buy from me. This becomes. And so the short squeeze really began running about the time that's the person here, bought in. Remember, I have no shares in this. I have no dog in this fight. Right after Thanksgiving weekend. So this has actually been going on for a little while. After the Q3 report came out and showed they were actually doing just fine, relatively speaking. What you must understand here is there is no next GameStop. This is basically it. This is literally documentary tier history. Hedge funds banked on GameStop going into the effing dirt. And the populist left, the populist right, and a bunch of, he calls them F-tons of Karen and Steve normies on Robinhood bought a share or two. And every single share counts. Now, remember, if you have a hedge fund manager buys 500,000 shares of it, that's 500,000 shares. But if 500,000 people buy one share, that's 500,000 shares too. And if 500,000 people buy 100 shares, that's 50 million shares. So that's a lot of shares. And remember, every single share counts. Every single share of some rando of RH owns, every 10,000 shares of WSB Whale holds, every single share is being held by people who leave the shorts with no choice but to buy for them. In other words, the shareholders dictate the price. It's like having water, being the only person with a jug of water when everyone is thirsty. You can sell that water for whatever you want unless someone takes a shotgun and blows you away to take it from you. We, myself included, being the writer of this piece, not me personally, will sell them at whatever effing price we choose, and they will pay it, even if they must liquidate all their other assets and bankrupt the hedge funds. We don't effing care. Now, I want to point out something here, and this is advice I've given my own son. I don't believe my son is involved in this, although he's got, I think he has stock in some other stuff, and he put in just a couple $100. One of my sons, anyways. And it's a piece of advice I was given by a person that I didn't learn it in time, or my business would still be in place, is if you're trying to make a profit in a business, don't worry about if someone else makes their profit. Worry about making yours. If you sell your product at a profit, like let's say a comic book is selling for the book price says the comic book price guide. Look, we'll give a great example. This is a copy of the Hobbit graphic novel. It's one of the great comic books ever made. The originals probably sell for like 30 or 40 these days. I used to have it when I had my comic book store back in the 80s. Great art, great everything. I highly recommend it. Now, let's say this is selling for $10. Actually, let's see, it came out at $7.99, $2.99. That $12.99 was the cover price when this came out. Let's say it's selling for $30 or $40 now, first printing, which is this is. It's in lousy shape because I keep reading it because that's what comic books are for, to read them. If I buy it for $12 and I sell it for $16, I've made my $4. Now, if someone else sells it for $25, what do I care? I've made my profit. So if any of these people who bought this stuff, if you're a person who really can't afford to do this, and you choose to sell something, and you bought, let's say you bought GameStop because you heard about this later at 50, and now it's trading at 300, and you just say, you know what, I'm going to sell that $1,000 I put in, that's now worth $4,000. I'm going to sell that and get my $4,000. That's fine. Or I'm going to sell half of it and make $2,000. So I'm up $1,500, and I'll leave the other two in there in case things happen. My thought is this: if something goes up, and I give this advice to my son, if something goes up ridiculously, you put in $300 and suddenly it has a paper value of $2,000. Sell half. So now your $300 in 1 week or 1 day or whatever has now become $1,000 minus your taxes. So you probably made about $300. You probably net around $300, and you still have half of your share. So now you're playing with house money. So it doesn't matter what happens. You're playing with house money. That's the advice I would give. Because to normal people who don't have money to lose. That's my advice. I'm not a stockbroker. I'm just a normal person. But my thought is always, I'm going to make my profit, and I don't care what other people make. I don't care if rich people are rich. That doesn't bother me. But anyways, back to the article. Shorts who F over scams like Enron are good. Fine, they devalue companies that don't deserve it, but not shorts who literally make money off of things like the scamdemic, as GME was just one example. Effing over other people and taking their money. Don't know why they hit GME in particular as a brick and mortar, maybe. Maybe it's because of the digital game marketplace being stronger. Compare AMC, not nearly as heavily shorted, but also a meme stock. I guess it's because the theater experience is kind of its own thing. I mean, going to the theater is nice. I went to see Fatima during the pandemic, and it was a great movie. And although I didn't like the way they changed the ending, but that's a whole nother story, since it's based on a true story. And now the mainstream media, Big Wall Street, and all these efforts are absolutely livid. They've been gaming the market sentiment for decades, and they've got nice, fancy econ degrees from Ivy Leagues and wear suits to work. They deserve it. But no, not a bunch of random normal people on the web, forums and shit. And the fact that they so stubbornly held out against the sentiment really merely reinforced the will of all of us longs. Because we're like, bro, just give up and cover your positions. It's over. Nope. Instead, they begged for CNBC to run endless hit pieces about how GameStop isn't worth X. But the thing is, we aren't trading on GME's actual worth. The stock value is being traded on the shorts need to cover. Basically, they've been making money off of other people's losses as long as they've been shorting companies that don't deserve it. And now they're the ones being bent over. They're whining to the SEC to game the system for them, or the government to change the rules for them. They are facing bankruptcy based on this bet, and the idea that they could be so thoroughly effed over by their lack of risk management terrifies them. They've been worth 7 figures for years, decades for some of the oldest traders. The idea of losing it all is so horrifying that they are pulling every dirty trick they can to keep us from winning. So yes, a bunch of WS people of effing commies, and I don't care right now. We have a common enemy here. The scum that have been sucking value out of working people's pockets for years on end. They want to turn around and give it to some trans rights charity or some shit. I don't care. Our paths diverge when the fight is over. But until then, all the hedge funds can go F themselves. They got their money from the banks that were bailed out in 2008. We want our effing money back. And that's this piece. And there's a second piece that showed up on Gab that I also want to read you. And this is the reason why. And remember, I mentioned in that first piece, I'm going to put this in chat right now. I mentioned in that first piece how there was all these people who had six figures to throw away who jumped into this. Now, this is written, presuming that it's authentic, by someone who does not have six figures to throw around. And this is titled, "A Message to Everyone on Wall Street from Somebody with Nothing to Lose. You only think you're in control." And this is posted by someone. I'm trying to read what that name is. Let me double glass myself. It was put up yesterday by Hungry Freaks Daddy an hour ago. So I do not vouch for the authenticity of any of this because, like I said, this is someone posting on Gab, and it could be this person could be anyone. A message to everyone on Wall Street from somebody with nothing to lose. You only think you're control. And let me point out something. No, there is nobody more dangerous than someone with nothing to lose. It's like the line from the movie Spartacus. When a Roman loses his life, they're losing the pleasures of life. When a rich person loses their life, a slave loses their pain, its life's pains. Okay, here's the piece. You're trying to scare us into selling. It won't work. Let me explain why. I grew up poor. I grew up on the poor side of town. I remember my parents struggling with money for years. Shitty cars, shitty clothes. Never owned any video game consoles because not only did my parents not approve of them, they couldn't afford them. Ramen was a staple at home. By the way, for the record, I've never had ramen. I know people who live off of it. I've never had it. I still eat it to this day. And pro tip you can have for the future, a slice of cheese and a whisked egg in your ramen make it way better than just seasoning alone. And just to give you an idea of this, my parents, like I said, were Depression era people. My mother used to buy this thing called 7-bone steak. It is literally the cheapest meat you can buy in terms of beef steak. It is the bone. There's a huge bone in there. There's not a lot of meat in it, but it's steak. And I loved steak as a kid. And my mother would cut out the steak pot and she'd fry up the steak and the bones. She might make a soup for. I was not a big soup guy, but I loved that 7-bone steak. And every now and then, even though I buy expensive cuts of meat these days because I lived next to the butcher shop for 30 years until the butcher died. In fact, it will be a year next month that he died. And the family ended up closing the butcher shop. But I'll every now and then buy 7-bone steak. And even though it's tough, I love it because I remember my mother having it because my mother saying, there's going to be meat in the house if my boys want meat. And sometimes they'd put it in the sauce and that would tend to make it more tender because it would slow cook in the sauce and so forth because we're Sicilian. But I'll still eat it just like this guy will still eat ramen. I've been broke almost my entire life. I've never had more than 9,000 liquid at one time. I've been nearly homeless too many times to count. I'm an expert at thrift store shopping. I've worked 50, 60, 70, 80, even 90-hour weeks at shit jobs since I started working at 18. I've never stolen. My parents raised me to be an honest and good person and a hard worker, and that's just who I am. There are millions of people like this in America, by the way. Millions. I've struggled and have always dealt with debt. I've lived basically paycheck to paycheck for my entire adult life. I've not, but I've known people who have. And most people who have are really solid people. If you think the prospect of losing the few $100s I have in GME is going to scare me into selling before Friday, you couldn't be more wrong. When you only average like $1,000 in your checking account, what's the difference when it's 100 or 10? Do you have any idea how many times I've been there before? Do you know what I do when I'm completely effing broke? I literally shrug my shoulders, play some video games and music until my next paycheck, and I'll do it again. It's like that line from the first of the Shop movies. What do you do when you're out of money, when you don't have any money, Richard? And Richard Shop, being a sergeant who's just been raised to lieutenant in the movie, says, "I do. You do it out, sir." And of course, Wellesley, being rich, says, "No, you borrow from a bank." Normal people, when they don't have it, do without. Credit cards change that a little bit, but that's just the way it goes there. Again, back to this. I'll reread that line again. Do you know what I do when I'm completely effing broke? I literally shrug my shoulders, play some video games or music until my next paycheck, and I do it again. I'm not here to get rich overnight. I don't have enough to invest to make that happen. I'm here to say F you and be a part of this moment, this movement. I will never sell. Never. I don't even care about the money at this point. If I never see it again, it makes no difference to me. I have to go right back to work tomorrow and the next day and the next week and the next month and the next year. There isn't a single thing you can do to change my position. I risk my money happily. I'm not the least bit scared or worried. You might be a financial expert, but I am a survival master. Power to the people. I will not sell. Now, there's something else important about this line. That now, if it was me, I would sell half, get my money back, and I could still hold the rest till infinitum. I'd have made a profit, and these guys are still in pain. But that's me. But if you have 1 million people who are thinking like that, then you don't survive. And now I've talked about all these things, but I haven't talked much about Robinhood. And the Robinhood stuff, I think, is hilarious because you're basically talking about a company that made all of its money based on the idea that, hey, you have the power to trade. And then this company, whose entire existence is based on the idea that you, the individual, have the right to trade stocks as you wish, suddenly decides, we're not going to let you do it. And suddenly large companies push this. And suddenly the SEC is starting to talk about this. And we find out that Janet Yellen, when questioned about this, because, she's now, should she recuse herself on this because she was paid $810,000 or nearly $810,000 from the hedge fund embroiled in the GameStop debacle. Jen Psaki, the spokesperson for the press secretary for the White House, says she'll circle back to it and points out how wonderful it is that Janet Yellen was born with tits. Now, I think this is very, very interesting. And I want to quote something that Lauren Bobbitt has said about this. First, big tech censored conservatives. Now, big tech is colluding with Wall Street to bail out hedge funds after private investors beaten them in their own game. Congress should subpoena Robinhood and anyone involved in GameStop, so with the GameStop halt, and make them explain themselves. And remember, GameStop not only did Robinhood stop trading in their stock, stop people from being allowed to trade in their stock, but there are reports that they actually force things to people to sell. that they actually sell. They only would allow to sell because remember, every stock that's sold, even at the price it's at now, even if it's at 200 or 100 or whatever, decreases the losses for the hedge fund guys. The hedge fund guys are at a point where they don't, it would be nice, they would still love for it to GameStop to go bankrupt. It's not going to. They would love it to go back to where they borrowed. At least they would break even and only lose whatever interest they paid. But there are guys now who, if I lose $500 million, that's better than going bankrupt. And there is some people making that calculation. So if they can get people to sell at 200 and save their sorry asses, they'll do it. And if Robinhood helps them out. Now remember, I love that this thing is named Robinhood because I'm a big fan of the old Richard Green Robinhood series, which I've been watching while I've been on quarantine. And Mel Brooks had this skit called The 1,000-Year-Old Man. And he said he knew Robinhood, and Robinhood didn't rob from the rich and give to the poor. He robbed from everybody and kept everything, and had a publicity guy named Murray who put out things. Robinhood robs from the rich and gives to the poor. That was the Mel Brooks skit. And that's basically what's happening here, where you have Robinhood deciding that, hey, we're going to protect these hedge funds. Now, there are class action suits against them, and they are probably going to lose those class action suits. They're probably going to be penalized heavily. But think about this. If you have the possibility of losing billions, and instead you lose $1 billion or $500,000 or $500 million, and your company ends up paying a $100 million fine, you're way ahead. So these guys, in my opinion, excuse me, the last remnants of COVID. In my opinion, these guys are figuring, even if their company goes under, even if all these bad things happen, as long as they make money, as long as they're not destroyed, because they can always do this again with a different thing, then they'll survive. And if they survive, they can live to do this again. So now, and again, this is a quick thread. There's a great thread on Battleswarm blog that explains it again. So I'm going to put this tweet out there. And I know I've spent more time on this than I expended. Yeah. And now the Spydam, I think this is the person who was hitting me last week on other things. And he's right. Then free market, if the little guy wins and the millionaire loses, that's the game. That's how the game should be. If you're playing the game, that's where it is. Now I'm going to summarize this one more time for those of you who've come late. Now again, Tim borrows shares in GME, sells them for 10, pays Bob $1 to do this, and promises to give Bob the shares back. If it goes down to 5, buys the shares back at a piece of price. Tim's profit, $10 minus 5 minus 1, $4 profit. And he'll pay a tax on that profit, so its actual profit's probably 3. Enter Wall Street Bets, a trading investment subedit. Someone noticed again that the hedge fund shorted 140% of all the shares available. They were so damn greedy, they borrowed more shares than actually existed. That's how arrogant and dumb they were. Because remember what I said earlier, they were betting on the company. They were out to destroy the company. Now, if they had just borrowed 90%, they wouldn't be in this situation. It was literally impossible to buy them all back. So someone on Wall Street Bets realized this and told everyone. Now, the rule with short selling is they have to borrow that must be paid back. So now their greed ruined them. The Redditors, normal people, bought every share they could lay their hands on, driving the price up like crazy. So these Redditors bought the shares, driving the price up. The hedge fund sold and made $100 million, but now they had to spend $1.479 billion getting those shares back at a loss of $1.3798 billion. So eventually, the due date for these hedge funds need to return the shares, and what do? They double down. They short more because they're sure they can manipulate the stock market to get them to crash, thereby saving themselves. And again, in the Maverick story I told you about, the guy says, all right, I'm going to take my hit. I'll win on another deal. And these guys could have done this. These guys were in a position where they could take their hit and say, I'm gonna still be a rich guy. I'm still gonna have X, Y, or Z. But then their reputation's a hit. But now it's carnage. Is the result. And I'm going to quote this thing from APE News. Across most America, GameStop is just a place to buy a video game. On Wall Street, so it's become a battleground where swarms of small investments see themselves making an epic stand against the 1%. Two investment firms that place bets for money-losing GameStop fall have essentially thrown in the towel. One, Citron Research, acknowledged Wednesday in a YouTube video that it has unwound the majority of its bets and took a loss of 100% to do so. So again, some of these guys have figured, all right, I'm going to take my hit. And again, these guys are all taking a thing. And here's NBC News. Josh Kaplan. Short sellers lost $14.3 billion today alone on GameStop, according to S3 Partners. Point72 lost 10 to 15% of their value. D1 Capital Partners, 20%. Melvin Capital, 30%. And again, this is another tweet. So now hedge funds are crying on literally every platform they can get their hands on. They want the government to stop trading. They want this Reddit Ford investigated and banned. They're screaming market manipulation when in reality, these hedge funds were the ones manipulating the stock, but they got caught and now are trying to take their ball and go home. While these hedge funds are on every news channel screaming about Reddit and Wall Street bets, they eventually draw attention to what's going on. And now they're crying hate speech, white supremacy, racism on all of this stuff, which is hilarious. And the Babylon Bee has a great piece. I'm going to read you the Babylon Bee piece. Merriam-Webster changes definition of white supremacists to anyone who wins in the stock market when they're not supposed to. Definition of white supremacist: a person who makes a lot of money in the stock market when they're not supposed to. If Wall Street, and again, this is the Babylon Bee. What Wall Street Bets did was a clear hate crime against hedge fund managers on Wall Street, said Chad Fishstick of Melvin Capital. Trolls on the internet have a dark history of discrimination against black and brown indigenous people, as well as important hedge fund managers like us, and it must stop. Sources inside Merriam-Webster reported that after a quick call from a few Wall Street bigwigs, they quickly rushed to change the definition of white supremacists to fall more in line with the modern understanding of this horrible phrase. Now, again, this is a lot of fun in that respect. And as I've already explained, people aren't going to give it. But think about what Robinhood has done. They've basically destroyed their own business. Nobody trusts them anymore. It's very, very ridiculous. But again, that tells you who they're working for. Who you can't, if you want to find out who you're enslaved to, find out who you are allowed to insult publicly. Find out if you are not allowed to say China virus or Wuhan virus, you're enslaved to China. If you are not allowed to buy those stocks, then Robinhood is owned by the hedge fund guys. And what I find interesting, and I'm going to quote myself, which is, it's not considered proper to quote yourself. But now remember, Google, for example, now trying to protect Robinhood. Google just deleted over 100,000 negative reviews of Robinhood. And I laugh at this in one respect because a lot of the people who are involved in this stuff. Oh, the Babylon Bee link was too long. I'll have to get a new link to that, but I'm going to put my tweet in here. A lot of the people who are currently involved in this Robinhood stuff, in these other things, are the same people who said that, suggesting that the tech people are this is a great one from Babylon B. New SEC rule: Wall Street will now only allow traders who wear a top hat and monocle to carry around giant bags of money. But these are the same people who say that any of us who suggest because, remember, now think about this for a second. GameStop's, the big tech people, and Robinhood stopping, and the SEC getting involved in stopping trading on Robinhood of GameStop is a sure sign that things are being manipulated. But 5 cities in 5 key states stopping the counting of voting on election night when Donald Trump was way ahead, and it would take a miraculous amount of votes for Joe Biden to suddenly appear to get the lead, is perfectly legit, and anyone who says otherwise is a conspiracy theorist. Think about that for a second. I'm going to repeat that. A lot of the same people who are complaining about Robinhood stopping trading, and the Wall Street people conspiring to stopping trading, and the government people conspiring to help the stopping trading. And see, this is a conspiracy, and I agree. This is prima facie evidence of such a conspiracy. Are the same ones who say that all these cities stopping the count of votes while Donald Trump was ahead, and Biden miraculously coming up with these votes. Oh, that's a conspiracy theory. That's a conspiracy theory. Yes, this was rigged here, but it wasn't rigged there. That's really the danger of all of this. This is the real danger for the left to this, in that this illustrates the reality of what was being done. This illustrates it illustrates the reality. And I'm going to, okay, I've got a clean link for the Babylon Bee article, so I'm going to throw that in there. This illustrates this reality. Remember, you cannot, don't tell me this. I mean, and think about this. A lot of left, because a lot of people left of center are in on this thing. It's not going to be very hard. It's not very hard to convince people who have been victims of a conspiracy that is happening right in front of their faces. And remember, what happened on election night happened in front of our faces. That fellow who went on the rant concerning the pipeline said bluntly that this wasn't a theft, because a theft is what you do outside of people's things. This was done in the face. There's a very funny Babylon Bee article. GameStop announced that due to skyrocketing stock, they can now afford to pay up to 25 cents for your used games. Because, as I said, the GameStop business model is very funny like that. But again, this is what's going on. This is the real danger on this for the left, is because it illustrates what happened in the election, and it illustrates it in a way that average people can understand it, which is why big tech and Google and something, I've maintained since the beginning that the theft of the election is easily understandable by people, which is why so much effort has been meant to stifle anyone talking about it. This is something regular people can understand. What's happened with Robinhood, the stopping of trading, the keeping people from making their deals. And it's easy to understand. And because it's easy to understand, then it's very hard to tell people otherwise. And again, let me read 2 tweets from Bridget Paisley. They locked us up, shut down the economy, and gave us $1,200. And what did Americans do? They decided their favorite new video game is effing with the hedge funds. I've never been prouder. When will they realize that everyone is jobless and stuck at home with nothing to do but overthrow their government? And this is Keith Woods. They have rigged everything, silenced dissent with tense tech censorship and financial deplatforming, rigged the economy with insider trading, rigged democracy with lobbying and mass immigration, and then they'll tell you with a straight face that racist rednecks are the problem. And here's another tweet on the subject. Remember when senators got coronavirus briefings before the public sold off millions of shares in stocks before the crash hit and faced no consequences, no regulation? Then Reddit made one stock into a meme, and they're talking about restructuring the whole market. Remember, Joe Biden has only been president. Today is the 29th. This is literally the 10th day of his presidency. And all this stuff is going on. All this stuff is going on. And I want to jump over to John Kerry and the second topic I was going to talk about. I've gone on much longer than I expected here. But here's the bottom line. My advice, and I'm going to repeat the advice I gave to earlier in the show. If you're doing this just to stick these people, fine. And if you want to lose your money, if you don't care if your money sits there, fine. If you're an average person, my advice is sell half of what you've got, take your profit, and you can use the other half to stick these people if you want, because you're now playing with house money. Don't take if you're an average person who does not have six figures to blow and you put $100 in like that guy there, take your profit, keep the other half. You can keep sticking them with that other half, because remember, 140% of the shares were leveraged, so you can still pound these people. But it's also something else I want to point out, that forced selling, again, the forced selling that they talked about, it's all about saving them a bit. If they save themselves a little bit, then these guys survive, and those guys will try and do a little bit better. Okay. And I want to read you this piece from Hogwash about these folks, because this comes in line with the shutting down of the pipeline and so forth. And I want to stress this. This is Hogwash on our betters and Vogons. We deplorables just won't get in line and follow the dictates of our betters. In 2016, we rebelled and voted in Brexit and elected Donald Trump, and now we've messed with the stock market via Livestream Gamestop. Our betters' reactions to the various rebellious activities remind me of some characters from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the Vogons. This is a quote from Douglas Adams' book. They are among the most unpleasant races in the galaxy, not actually evil, but bad-tempered, bureaucratic, officious, and callous. They won't even lift a finger to save their own grandmothers from the ravenous bug-battered beast of trial without orders, signed in triplicate, sent in, sent back, queried, lost, found, subjected to public inquiry, lost again, and finally buried in soft peat for 3 months and recycled as firelighters. The best way to get a drink out of a Vogon is to stick your finger down his throat, and the best way to irritate him is to feed his grandmother to the ravenous bug-battered beast of trial. On no account should you allow a Vogon to read poetry to you. There are similarities. Now, again, this is William Hoge. There are similarities and differences. For example, the poetry and a staggering majority of other art being published by our betters today isn't very good, and our betters would rather virtue signal than actually get their hands dirty. As for bureaucracy, it's our betters who make up the deep state and almost all of big tech. The Vogons scream resistance is useless at their prisoners. Our betters shut down our social media accounts. The principal difference I see is that Vogons aren't actually evil. I'm not sure that can be said for a significant group of our betters. By the way, resistance isn't useless. The 4 years of the Trump administration provide some real benefits, such as lower unemployment, real growth in wages, and a cohort of judges who believe in following the law. The GameStop stock deals turned the tables on some Wall Street insiders, doing to them what they believed they had a right to do to retail investors. I have no idea what the next act of rebellion will be, but it will come. And what's interesting about this is, again, think of the Keystone Pipeline shutdown. Now, the Keystone Pipeline shutdown directly affects unions that supported Joe Biden. The Keystone Pipeline and the drilling shutdowns on federal lands directly affect states like New Mexico, which voted for Joe Biden. And I want to point out, and this is an important point that I've made before. Nobody is claiming New Mexico was stolen. New Mexico, they voted for Joe Biden. And while this election was in fact stolen, and that is my opinion, and the evidence, in my opinion, points to that, and the circumstantial evidence, as I've already noted, points to that. Even so, it was only stolen in those 5 cities to flip those states. In other words, tens of millions of people actually voted for Joe Biden. There were probably 60 or 70 million votes for him that were legitimate. Let's put it this way. Most of the votes for Joe Biden were legitimate votes. Most of the votes that you see for Joe Biden were legitimate votes. It was only the steal in certain spots at a certain way that flipped the election, just like the GameStop stuff. So a lot of people actually voted for this. And suddenly they find themselves in trouble. And you saw the rant of the rant of the person, the black gentleman whose life apparently does not matter, about how things were taken. I'm going to put out the tweet that has this thing. Nothing to see here, just Black Lives Mattering. And this is a fellow who's talking about how he's not going to be able to pay his mortgage, how he's not going to be able to pay for his car and so forth because of the pipeline shutdown. And John Kerry is telling them, well, they should get other jobs like solar panels. Now, I laughed particularly loud at that because, as I said, I've been out of work now for 3 weeks because of COVID. I'm going back to work in my warehouse that I work at. Now, the warehouse that I work at used to be a wire company. But before that, it was the location of Evergreen Solar in Massachusetts. Now, Evergreen Solar was this big solar company pushed during the Deval Patrick years here in Massachusetts, and people saying, oh, this is the future. They gave them subsidies. They gave them great publicity. The governor appeared there. They were going all in about how Evergreen Solar was going to be the future of Massachusetts. Well, they went under, and the stuff's made in China now. Now, I'm not going to go into how the life cycle of solar panels, how it costs more in energy to make solar panels than they save, and how the waste from solar panels is an environmental hazard. These are all things that people who are ignorant don't realize and don't care about, because it's not about whether or not something is actually worthwhile. It's about something. It's about feeling good. It's sort of like the Big Bang Theory. There's this great scene where they are in a car, they're going to this gaming convention. And remember, these are all physicists. They shut down. And somebody says, anybody know anything about internal combustion engines? Sure, it's simple. 19th century technology. Anybody know how to fix internal combustion engines? Not a one of them. Now, this is why, by the way, I suggest to people get into the trades. And if you're a Trump supporter and you really want to screw the people who are excluding you and hating on you and so forth, like I regret to say, I've heard from a friend. I used to be in a group that gamed, and I couldn't go anymore because I got a different shift. And I've heard from a friend that he's excluded now for supporting Trump. If you really want to get back at people like that, go into a trade and decide, you know what? I'm only doing plumbing for people who voted for Trump. Or I'm only doing plumbing. I'm only doing roofs for people who are conservatives or so forth. And watch how fast the worm turns. My father used to build houses. I can't nail 2 boards together properly. But actually, that's not true. I did my own roof on the side with some help, and I did it all right. I should actually fix my roof on that other house, because it's a small one, but it's at the top of the ladder, and I don't trust myself. But anyways, and I'm up much older than I was when did it 20 years ago. But I digress. You have people who basically have been elites, have never had to worry about where their next meal is coming from, never had to worry about this. And I talked about this earlier, why one of the reasons why I try and be a little bit understanding of the people in Congress who allowed the steal to go through and the people in the legislatures who allowed the steal to go through, because they find themselves part of the elites and cannot imagine life outside of it. Because it's not where you are, it's how far you fall. Before Barack Obama was elected, I had a very good job, very good money, worked from home 6 days out of 7, or 4 days out of 5. No credit card debts, was ahead on my mortgages and so forth. Only had the one mortgage at the time. After Obama was elected, crashed and burned the economy. And it's only through the Trump years that I went from, by the time Obama left office, I was a temp worker working third shift. And now I've built myself back up to, I'm a regular worker with good benefits, although a lousy pay. I'm still only making 65% of what I made under when Bush was president. But again, that's life. I just keep working. So I have a very good perspective on this. But these guys don't. And people are finding us out. People are actually seeing costs, not just the Robinhood people, but the pipeline people. You have 4 congressmen from Texas, Democrats, saying, please don't do this. Please don't do this. Please reconsider this, because they're hurting. And it's hurting their own people. But you have to remember something, that if you do not rely on voters to get elected, one of the advantages of having an election, a system where you do not have to worry about being elected, is that if voters are hurting and complaining, who cares? They are no longer necessary. It is no longer vital to have voters voting with you, because, hey, if I can steal an election, I don't need you. Now, and I mean, look at the Wall Street. Look at Nancy Pelosi. Just before the government announces we're going to go all to electric cars, Pelosi puts a bunch of money into Tesla. Just before the announcement. Now, mind you, there are reasons to put money into Tesla. Tesla produces a product. The people who buy it like it. And it may work out. But remember, California is with blackouts. Where are they going to get all the electricity to power all this stuff? Where are they going to get it? I mean, it's very, very, very... I mean, it's not funny, but it's sad. And I don't have... I have pity for people in the sense that I don't like to see people hurt. But a lot of the people in these situations, that's their own... It's their own problem. It's their moves. They voted for this. Remember, millions of people voted for Joe Biden. Tens of millions of people. My state of Massachusetts legitimately voted for Joe Biden. No question about it. There are tens of millions of people who voted for Joe Biden. And they're getting what they paid for. Very, very rough. And I want to quote this piece from Mark Ellis called the Tragedy of Joe Biden Voters. I'm already at an hour and a half, which I did not expect to be. So I don't want to go longer than that, because I still want to get to the Brady stuff and the Schilling stuff, because I'm into that stuff. So I'm going to enjoy it. It's something I'll enjoy talking about. The tragic Biden voter is tragic for America. When the Paris Accords yoke back around our necks, expect good Democrats to pony up without protest for meaningless climate structures that don't measurably affect environmental pollution, while the COVID communists snicker at our idiocy and foul the air, water, land, and unregulated contaminants. Never mind what the standard of living awaits the children and grandchildren. The United States must lead the way. Thoughts and prayers for those whose livelihoods are scuttled by the cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline. Don't be surprised when that cousin formerly earning in the high five figures as a welder shows up at your door looking for odd jobs. Tell him to call Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. When Buttigieg's office blows him off, the next call should be your friends in the Middle East because they'll be waiting. Remember, Donald Trump made this country energy independent, and Joe Biden's got a fix for that. But more importantly, realize this, that the Keystone Pipeline business and the Paris Accords business is the exact same thing as what's happening with Robinhood and these stocks, in that these are not moves to save the environment. They never have been. These are not moves to make things more energy efficient. They don't. What they are moves to is they are diverting large amounts of the capital of the United States to industries where the people who are connected, their friends, their children, their grandchildren, have invested their money. They are basically voting money to the people who voted them in. And in return, themselves as lobbyists, their children as members of boards, or as people who get employed by these companies, are going to be set for life. And that pipeline guy from that tweet, that black life is not going to matter. Those elites are going to get giant returns. And they're going to do it borrowing the money from your grandchildren. And it's very sad, but it's not unjust. It's very sad, but it's not unjust. I wish it was something different. But again, the people who allowed the theft of the election, the legislatures who could have stopped it, the judges who did not want to be involved, the Supreme Court who did not want to have a new Dred Scott ruling. This is the price. And again, we're only 10 days in to this administration. 10 days! And we've seen this. What do you think is going to happen in 20 days? What do you think is going to happen in 30 days? What's funny is if this keeps up, they're going to actually need those National Guard troops in the Capitol. But then they're not going to trust them because I'll bet you a lot of those National Guard troops have friends who have money in GameStop right now. But, I mean, we've reached a point where elite private schools are hosting racially segregated dialogue sections with parents and teachers. I wonder if they're going to give them separate water fountains too. Now we find out, of course, that after the fact that the death count in New York from Andrew Cuomo, remember, everyone was saying how wonderful a job Cuomo was doing. 50% higher than was said before. We actually have a pharmaceutical company canceling their vaccine development because they figure herd immunity will do it better. And here's a quote from Spike Cohen. Quote, 1.37 million more people will die than would have died without the unemployment shock that the pandemic caused. Excess deaths will disproportionately affect African Americans. Pandemic didn't cause it. The lockdowns caused it and will lead to more deaths. But the good news is, of course, suddenly in blue states and blue cities, the lockdowns are going away or being lessened because Donald Trump isn't in office, so it wasn't necessary. Just like Amazon is suddenly willing to help with vaccine distribution because now it doesn't help Donald Trump. This is going to end much worse. It's going to get an awful lot worse before it gets better. But as a nation, because we were willing to let this happen, remember, the steal doesn't happen unless we consent to it. Then that's just the way it is. We'll see where this goes. There's a great, the Daily Wire has a podcast live now saying Robinhood becomes the sheriff of Nottingham. Great point there. Okay, we're losing some interest here. I can tell by the numbers, but I do want to touch a little bit on the Brady and Schilling things. First, we'll do Curt Schilling very fast because it's Baseball Hall of Fame, and baseball I know a lot more about. Hall of Fame voting took place. No person got the 75% required. Curt Schilling was fell 16 votes short. Schilling is asked to be taken off of the Hall of Fame ballot because, as he put it, baseball's done more for me than I've done for it, and I'll wait for the Veterans Committee because he has one more year on the ballot, and I'll let the people who've actually played the game decide whether or not I deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. And as he puts it, I don't think I deserve to be. Now, my rule on Hall of Fames is very simple. And unfortunately, the Hall of Fame doesn't work under my rule. My rule is simply this. If you have to think if a player belongs in a Hall of Fame, he doesn't belong in a Hall of Fame. If you have to think, does Curt Schilling belong in the Hall of Fame? Then he doesn't belong. Now, I think it's close myself. I think that if the only real way to decide, is Curt Schilling a better pitcher than a lot of people in the Hall of Fame? Yes. He had an excellent record. He played for some bad teams early. His one weakness was the gopher ball. The gopher ball, for those of you who don't know, being home runs. But when it comes down to it in big games, who do you want? Curt Schilling is definitely a guy you want. Remember, this is a guy who pitched through with the bleeding sock. Without Curt Schilling, we're still talking about the curse of the Bambino in Boston. But I say there's a very simple way of figuring out if Curt Schilling belongs in the Hall of Fame. List the starting pitchers in the Hall of Fame. And ask yourself, if you had a game you had to win, if your life depended on winning a game, would you rather have that Hall of Fame pitcher or Curt Schilling? Now, if the choice is Walter Johnson or Curt Schilling, I say Walter Johnson. If the choice is Curt Schilling or Early Wynn, I take Curt Schilling. And I'd go down the list, and if Schilling's better than 50% of them, I'd put him in. But let's be blunt. The only reason why Curt Schilling is not in the Hall of Fame is because he's a Trump supporter. He's a conservative, and he's not going to shut up about it. He doesn't care what you think. He'll say what he believes is the truth, and he doesn't care because he's an American. And he's a gamer, too. I mean, back when I used to play a baseball simulation called Status Pro Baseball put out by Avalon Hill, Curt Schilling's card had a number on the back of it, and that was his squad leader rating because they had a game called Squad Leader. And he was a big player. He used to play it all the time. So they actually put his squad leader rating on the back of the card. It's sort of like your rating in chess. I used to play chess, and I had a ranking of so points under chess rules. That was many, many decades ago. But when a Hall of Fame, and basically it's reached the point where they no longer have the ability to honor anybody. They can only have the ability to give what's owed, so to speak. If it's up to me, what I'd do is I would create a Hall of Fame within the Hall of Fame, the best of the best. Put 2 people at each position in it to start, and then add 1 person every year out of those already in the Hall of Fame. And the rule is basically, if you have to think if this person is one of the greatest players at that position, they don't belong on there. Simple as that. But politicizing the Hall of Fame doesn't do anything for anybody. Speaking of politicizing, I want to talk about Tom Brady. Now, the NFL has dropped like a rock. The NFL has dropped like a rock in terms of its, well, obviously attendance, because they don't allow attendance, but in ratings and so forth, to the point where the Super Bowl next. Now, think about this. A week from Sunday is the Super Bowl. And you have, in terms, if you were the NFL, if you wanted a storyline, you could not have asked for a better storyline. The best young quarterback in the league, Patrick Mahomes, versus a 6-time Super Bowl winner who brought a team to the Super Bowl in his first year on a new team, going for a 7th ring, 10th time in there. If you're the NFL, this is the storyline you wanted for the Super Bowl. And yet Super Bowl ads are selling for less than they were last year. And yet Anheuser-Busch has decided, we don't want to run Super Bowl ads. But the real fun has happened because of our friends on the left and Tom Brady. They hate Tom Brady. They hate Tom Brady with a passion. They hate Tom Brady with a passion because he's considered a Trump guy. Now, I'm not a football fan as a rule. I'm a baseball fan. I didn't watch any baseball this year because they decided to go woke. I don't know if I'll bother to watch any baseball next year. I'll play my baseball game online, but watch it on TV, forget it. I watched Tom Brady games when I could. Because I was in quarantine, I was able to watch Brady beat Aaron Rodgers. Now, everyone criticized, well, Brady threw 3 picks in the second half. Well, Brady had a giant lead. That's what he built a giant league so he could take risks. If you have a giant league, you can take the risk of throwing into traffic because you have a lead that you can burn, and the other team has to burn clock. You have clock to burn, and if you complete those long passes, the game's over. So Brady was able to take chances. By the way, I would have kicked that field goal. Everyone disagrees with me, but I would have kicked that field goal. Points on the board, because if they go for it and make the touchdown and the 2 points, now you have to stop Brady from driving down to kick a field goal. Since you have to stop Brady anyways, you might as well kick the field goal. And now if Rodgers scores a touchdown, you're going for a win. But I digress. So now Tom Brady is on Tampa Bay, and all of a sudden, all the sports writers loved New England and loved Cam Newton. And suddenly Bill Belichick couldn't get a winning record. Meanwhile, Brady takes a team that he hasn't trained with, hasn't worked out with, and takes it to the Super Bowl, beating 2 Hall of Fame caliber quarterbacks on the way. I mean, yeah, they beat Washington on the road, but Washington was an inferior team. I mean, if Brady lost to Washington, that would have been a big story. But he beat Drew Brees at home, and he beat Aaron Rodgers in Lambeau Field in the cold. And now he gets to play literally a home game for the Super Bowl. So a lot of people, Trump supporters, who Tom Brady is like the Trump supporter. Following Tom Brady is like being a Trump supporter in a blue state and putting out an American flag because you figure they won't stone your house for an American flag, but they will for a Donald Trump sign. And so they have to attack Brady. They're attacking him. You actually had leftists saying it's a disgrace that Tom Brady is still playing when Colin Kaepernick is not, who's just as good as Brady. Now, for those of you who are ignorant of football, and again, I count myself by comparison ignorant on football. Let's do something here. I'm going to pull up Tom Brady stats from ProFootballReference.com, and I'm going to pull up Colin Kaepernick stats. Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick. ApernIck. Stats. Now we're going to pull up both of these people's stats from ProFootballReference.com, and I'm going to put them in the chat room. Now we're going to start with Mr. Kaepernick. Oh, by the way, someone in chat mentioned the thing about Bitcoin going up. I'm not a big fan of Bitcoin myself, but if people want to invest in this stuff, feel free to do so. It's not my area of expertise, and I'm not going to tell people how to invest their money. Myself, I think it would be very nice if we were back at the system where you base your investments on reality. Speaking of reality, and this is why this Tom Brady thing comes into it. Now, here's Colin Kaepernick's stats. I'm on the stat page. He played 61 games. Oh, no, sorry, 69 games. All for the San Francisco 49ers. He has a completion rate of 59.8%. 1,011 completions on 1,692 passes. This is regular season. He threw 72 touchdowns and 30 interceptions. Now, in his years, let's see, his quarterback rating for his this is his quarterback rating over his 6 years career. 81.2, 98.3, which is 98.3 is pretty good. 91.6, 78.5, 90.7, and a career rating of 88.9. Now, this is ESPN also has a figure called the total quarterback rating, which is 69.5, 71.8, 67.3, 60.9, 43.7, and 49.2. Now, Colin Kaepernick made the playoffs 2 years, 2012 and 2013. He is 4-2 in the playoffs, according to this, if I'm reading that right. Wait a second, that says quarterback break. Oh, team record in games batted by quarterback. He's 4-2. Now, if you look at his similar players, he had 6 seasons. Players whose career was similarly of quality and shape. In his 3rd year and 4th year, he was pretty good. And his 3rd year is comparable. You have the players whose career were of similar quality and shape. In his 3rd year, quarterbacks who were similar were Mark Brunell, Charlie Johnson, Gus Frerotte, Josh Freeman, Eli Manning, Ken Anderson, Burt Jones, Tom Brady, and Terry Bradshaw. In his 4th year, quarterbacks who were similar. Johnson again, Cutler, Joe Montana. In other words, he had a very good 4th year. Eli Manning, Tom Brady again, Brett Favre, Boomer Esiason, Donovan McMahon, Josh Freeman, Mark Brunell. But by the time you get to the 5th year, the Hall of Famers drop from that list. The list is Josh Freeman, Jim Plunkett, Carson Wentz, Matt Hasselbeck, Steve McNair, Charlie Johnson, Tony Romo, Hattie, Chris Miller, and Jim Hart. And in his final year, similar quarterbacks again. Bradshaw's on that list. I don't know how he makes it on there. But Charlie Johnson, Carson Wentz, Blake Bortles. Nobody would accuse Blake Bortles of being a great quarterback. And his career, if you were to, the quarterbacks most like him, his career, over a career. Marcus Mariota, Carson Wentz, Blake Bortles, Jay Fielder, Scott Mitchell, Jameis Winston, David Carr, Stan Humphries, Elvis Grayback, and Kyle Orton. None of those people are in the Hall of Fame. None of them are likely to make it in the Hall of Fame. Now on appearances and leaderboards. If you look at his over his 6-year career, Colin Kaepernick What category did he ever lead anybody in? I'm looking at the list. Not seeing him there. In his career, he had 7 comeback wins. That makes him 157th among quarterbacks of all time. Game-winning drives, he was 3rd in the NFL in 2013, his best year. The leader had, in his career, he had 7. The leader had 9 that year. In his career, he ranks 185th. Kaepernick doesn't lead the league in anything. Didn't lead the league in anything. No, I take that. And it's pretty sad. But he was in the top 10 on pick sixes a couple of years. Now, look, they have something called a Hall of Fame monitor. Hall of Fame monitor is his ranking among people compared to other people who could be in the Hall of Fame. He ranks 135th among quarterbacks with a ranking of 16.43. The average Hall of Famer in the Football Hall of Fame has a ranking of 101.36. Now let's jump over to Tom Brady. Tom Brady has played 301 games. And remember, Tom Brady started through his first NFL pass in a real game in the year 2000. He appeared in one game, attempted 3 passes, completed 1 for 6 yards. And that was in the year 2000. In other words, it was in the 20th century because the 21st century actually starts with the year 2001. For those of you who don't know how math actually works. Tom Brady has led the league in attempts in 2017, in completion percentage in 2007 he led the league in practically everything. He's led the league in yards 3 times. He's led the league in touchdowns 4 times. He's led the league in touchdown percentage twice. He has never led the league in interceptions. He has led the league in interception percentage, the lowest percentage of interceptions, 4 times. He's had the longest pass in the league once during his career. Yards per attempt, he's led the league once. Average yards twice. Yards per game twice. Quarterback ratings. Now, I read you Colin Kaepernick's quarterback ratings. His highest quarterback rating for a season was 98.3. Here are Tom Brady's quarterback ratings. And we're going to start in the year 2000, where he played in one game with 3 passes. 42.4, 86.5, year he won a Super Bowl, 85.7, 85.9, 92.6, 92.3, 87.9, 117.2, led the league, 83.9, 96.2, 111. And these are all years where he started, with the exception of 2008, where he was 80.3.9, where you only started one game. These are all years where he started at least 16 games, with the exception of 2017, where he only started 12 because of the suspension. 105.6, 98.7, 87.3, 97.4, 102.2, 112.2 in the year he only started 12 games. I think those extra 12 games helped him, by the way. 102.8, 97.7, 88.0, and this year with Tampa Bay, 102.7. His career quarterback rating is 97.3. Now, I also read you Colin Kaepernick's ESPN quarterback ratings. His highest ever was 71.8. Now, this is a stat they started in 1986. 68.6 for Brady in that year. In 2006, I should say, is when they started it. 87.0, which led the league in 2007. 59.5 the year he got injured. 74.1, 79.1, again, leading the league. 73.8, 73.6.1, 63.1, 76.2, 68.4, 79.4, 70.6, 68.4, 55.7 during his last year in New England. And remember, he won a division with that team. And then 72.5. Tom Brady, in the playoffs, he's made the playoffs 17 times. His team's a 33-11 in the playoffs. And that's my brother. I'm going to cut this short, but bottom line is hold on a second. I'm going to answer this while I'm. Hello, Tony. Is it big because I'm doing the podcast right now? Everyone's okay, Leslie, but I can't stay on. I'm doing the podcast. Bye. It was my sister-in-law just checking to see if we were all right. My brother's old and he can be ill, so I don't turn down a call from my brother. I like you guys, but my brother trumps you guys. Both of my brothers do, and as it should be. If that was your brother calling and you had a choice between watching this podcast and talking to your brother, shame on you if you consider the podcast more important. But bottom line, Brady has played. Brady, again, 33-11 record as a quarterback in the playoffs. 33-11. Colin Kaepernick, in games he's played, 28-30 over a career. Now let's consider Brady. Now remember, Brady's won 6 Super Bowls. Now, if you list his career, who are the quarterbacks that Tom Brady is compatible with? I'm going to just go to his 20th year. In his 20th year, who is he compatible with? Most quarterbacks most like him. Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, who he just beat this week. Brett Favre, Hall of Famer. Fran Tarkenton, Hall of Famer. Phillip Rivers. I don't know if Phillip Rivers belongs on that list, but that's another story. Dan Marino, Hall of Famer. Aaron Rodgers, who we just beat, probably Hall of Famer. John Elway, Hall of Famer. Matt Ryan, I don't know if he belongs in the Hall of Fame someday. Ben Roethlisberger, he'll be a Hall of Famer. Career, who are the quarterbacks he's most compatible with? The exact same list. I'm a little surprised that Joe Montana isn't listed on there because he seems to be rather compatible with him. But that's another thing. Now, in terms of what he has done, approximate value weighted of active quarterbacks, he's ranked first. Over his career, he's ranked first. He's led the league, as I said. He leads the league. He's led the league in. I'm at the Football Reference page. I'm counting the categories that he has led the league in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. And these are things that he either leads the league in for his career or has led the league in for 1 year. 30, 31, 32. Oh, he's only second in active game-winning drives lead and third for career. I'm a little bit surprised. I thought he would have held those records by now. But, when you have a lot of leads, it's hard to. So we're at 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 48. I count 55 different categories where he has led the league. And his Hall of Fame monitor, remember Colin Kaepernick's Hall of Fame monitor rating, just to repeat that. Hall of Fame monitor rating for him was 16.3. Average Hall of Fame is 101.39. Tom Brady, average is 101.39. His Hall of Fame monitor rating is 248.44, which is second among quarterbacks ever. Ever. And yet you have leftists complaining that he belongs, that Brady is in the Super Bowl and Colin Kaepernick can't play. There are people actually making this argument. Now, I want to point out one other thing. There is one thing where Colin Kaepernick blows Tom Brady away at, and it's not close. And that's the combine measurements. That's the measurements that people made of prospective quarterbacks before they're drafted. Brady's height managed to get 76 inches. Height, Kaepernick's an inch taller. Brady was 211, Kaepernick 233. 40-yard dash, Brady ran it in 5.28. Kaepernick ran it in 4.53. Brady broad jump was 99. Kaepernick's was 115. His shuttle, 4.38 versus Kaepernick's 4.18. His three cone, 7.20 seconds versus Kaepernick's 6.85. Vertical leap, 24.5 for Brady, 32.5 for Kaepernick. And Kaepernick was drafted much higher than Tom Brady. Kaepernick, by the way, is 10 years younger than Brady. Brady is 43. Kaepernick is 33 at the moment. I mean, think about that for a second. He was the second round pick, 36th overall. Tom Brady was picked 199, and as Brady put it at the time when he talked about the combine, one of the worst things was one of the worst players in the combine. As he put it, fortunately, that's not what goes into making a quarterback. And the point I'm making is this. It's a question of reality versus fantasy. If you see things through the light of politics, then Joe Biden is legitimately president of the United States. He's legally. I don't deny that he's legally. But he's legitimately president of the United States. It's legitimate to say that the Keystone Pipeline workers and the oil workers are better off, and the country's better off by not having those jobs. That hedge fund managers need to be protected from the people, and it's all right to stop trading to protect them, and that Colin Kaepernick belongs in the NFL and Tom Brady doesn't. Oh, it's not fair that Brady's in the NFL and Tom Brady's not. But if you live in the real world, then stopping counting of voting on election day is suspicious. Stopping trading in stocks because it hurts hedge fund guys is suspicious. Stopping the Keystone Pipeline and expecting people who've been professionals in a specialized position to just get some other job is a joke. And any comparison to Tom Brady to Colin Kaepernick, suggesting that Kaepernick deserves a job because Brady has one, is a joke. That's the reality. Well, we've gone on 2 hours, which is 2 hours longer than I expected when I woke up this morning. I want to thank you for tuning in. I'm going to go. This is my wife has today off. It's the only full day we're going to have together because I have some stuff to do tomorrow. I want to thank you for joining. We'll be back whenever I feel like it. Now that I'm back to work, who knows when it'll be. So, hope you enjoyed it. If you like it, up arrow it. If you like what I do in general, hit the tip jar before they stop banning me. Till then, it's Pete the Tech Guy. We'll see you next time.